and welcome back to the Part-Time Otaku Podcast. My name is Dave.
My name is Grant.
And we're here. We're back. It's the end of our classic anime movie journey, at least for now. We have been, over the last month or two, if you guys have been keeping up, we've been reviewing some classic anime movies that we hadn't seen just by chance up to this point. Today we're going to talk about Grave of the Fireflies. The last couple, which movies have we done recently, Grant?
So we started off with Paprika, and then we followed that up with Your Name, and the last one we did was Akira.
All bangers. I mean, I know we loved some more than others.
Sure.
But all classics for a reason. And I think Grave of the Fireflies has a very specific tone. We're not exactly ending on a high note here.
No.
I think you warned me that this one was a bit of a somber watch.
Yeah, it was, and that was the thing too, like, you know, thankfully the past few movies, or like the movie nights we've done, we've kind of gone in blind. I think with the exception of Akira, you had seen that years and years ago, but we kind of went in blind. And this is the one too. I knew it was dark, but I didn't know like under what basis.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like there's an expectation of tone, but not content, which is kind of fun. So it was kind of, and
well
Akira had a similar thing, but it's more visually known. I find like this is an interesting one to go into for the first time.
Really well put. An expectation of tone, but not content. I think that's very apt for how we walked into this movie. That said, I think once you read the synopsis, and maybe that's how we can start, I think it's fair to say that you know what you're going in to listen or to watch. And listeners, you know what you're about to hear. Obviously, spoilers ahead for the whole movie, just in case you haven't somehow seen it and you're somehow listening to this. But we'll start with the synopsis. So, Grave of the Fireflies focuses on the story of Seita and Setsuko, two young Japanese siblings living in the declining days of World War II. When an American firebombing separates the two children from their parents, the two siblings must rely completely on one another while they struggle to fight for their survival. So, it's not exactly Honey, I Shrunk the Kids.
No doubt.
This film was written and directed by the same man, Isao Takahata, released in 1988. I apologize if I butchered the name. And I think Seita and Setsuko, maybe with a couple of exceptions, are in almost probably every frame of the movie, or they're at least in like 90% of the movie. So it focuses very specifically on their struggle. From here, sir, I pass it over to you. What are your general thoughts? What are your general feelings? We can get into specifics later, but I just want to know, how do you feel?
Well, it's, I'm not great is not how I would put it, but it's, this movie, I'm trying not to sound like like a white blogger from like the early 2000s, but like, and there's no other way like to put it like gently, though it's like hyperbolic. The movie was just powerful, like it's, I guess a good explanation is the opening scene, or one of the opening scenes, because we know the movie's set in World War II, and the casualties of war and all this and that. But like that first firebombing scene, I kind of just, there's like a shot where it looks up in the sky, and I was just like, oh, this is real. Like this is not like a fun little story. This isn't like a take. It's not like Akira where it was a take on events and and it was just feelings of years and years and years of being grinded down. This is like in the moment fear. And this movie just does that the whole way through. And I just felt like dread, like there's no, even the moments of levity, if you could call them that, is just, it's just sad. Like the movie is not, I have not seen a movie in a long, and I know I'm on a tangent here, but I have not seen a movie in a long time where it's like, this is our message. Like there's no and ifs or buts. Like, it's clear.
Yeah.
It's evident. There's, like little tangents here and there, little side roads, but like the message is clear from beginning to end of like, war sucks. It honestly reminded me of Attack on Titan a lot.
I kind of like that. I mean, I think we're coming off Akira going into this movie, right? Which is very different in a number of ways, obviously, tone and everything. But like a lot of these kind of art house, artsy movies are sometimes intentionally ambiguous, both in their endings and just sort of like, the kind of metaphors they throw in throughout the film. To your point, there's none of that in this. It's very specifically about the experience in living in a war-torn country. And yeah, I completely agree with that part of your take. Like, there's no ands, ifs, or buts about that. It's a dedication to that message. Actually, a fun fact is writer-director Isao Takahata on the movie himself, only person involved in the whole project that actually survived air bombings in his childhood. I don't know if it was from World War II or what. I couldn't find like details on that specifically, but he himself went through that, and that, I mean, like, that is such a poignant part of the whole movie. There's so many firebombs throughout the whole movie. You feel like that comes from somewhere pretty genuine for him.
And you know, it's just, you know, we've talked about, you know, specifically these movie nights, and, you know, we've talked about it over the past year. You know, we see this in a lot of the shows, you know, the anime shows that we watch, but the movies are really good because, you know, there's a limited time. You know, they're trying to tell a complete story, whether it's an hour and a half or 2 hours. Also, like, thank God this movie was only an hour and a half, because, like, an extra, like, 20 minutes would have, like, you know, I feel like I would have, like, just walked away, like, worse, you know?
90 minutes, big time sweet spot for this movie.
Yeah. But, you know, so the point I was getting at is, when it comes to these movies, they're really trying to use every angle they can to tell their story. You know, and, like, a big thing has just been the visual storytelling. Like, you know, this movie, there's a lot of dialogue. There's, you know, like, spoken narrative, but it's a lot of, like, just watching these kids be or do their best at being, you know? And it's crazy to think that sometimes, like, the simplest story has the most weight. Like, you know, and all 4 of the movies that we covered, or the other 3, is like Akira, Your Name, and Paprika, they all had to use these sci-fi elements. They found, like, these angles to get their point across. And this movie is just like, no. It's just like, you know, it's honestly shocking. Like, to see it, like, you see this more in, you know, obviously, like, you know, live action dramas where, like, there is no, you know, there is no special effects in life. There's no portals. Right. There's no dream sequences.
Yeah, there's no, like,
you're living it. Yeah.
There's no sci-fi based mechanic, right? There's no shonen, like, oh, in this world, these are, like, there's no world building moment other than it's 1945 Japan. Like, that's it.
Right? It's refreshing. It was like watching Band of Brothers or something like that.
Yeah.
Or, you know, or it's a historical drama, and there is, you know, like, there's the elements of, like, the spirits. Like, throughout the movie, we're kind of guided along with, you know, Setsuko and Saida through the story. You kind of see them in the background, which I thought was just, like, it was just, like, such a nice little touch of, you know, just, like, watching their journey along. And I guess so there is, you know, some of the sci-fi fantasy elements. If you really, you know, that's like trying to draw blood from a stone there. Like, come on, you know, spare me on that. But it's just a beautiful movie, and you know, it continues and continues to show, you know, it wasn't just like there was one bad event. It wasn't just the fire bombings. It was just all the realities that come along with war. They didn't, like, show the one thing of it all. It showed, you know, all the people suffering from malnutrition, the food shortages, and, you know, just, like, the no living and all this and that. It's just what a beautiful, truly a truly beautiful movie. Like, you know, in comparison to Akira, I think this is a classic. Like, Akira's a classic, obviously, but this stands out as way more, for me, way more of a bigger deal.
I agree with you. I mean, you know, I think I like Akira a little more in some other ways. Like, you know, obviously it's set a certain tone and changed a lot of things animation wise, and it has its own history. But in terms of, like, just a story, you know, I'm much more fond of how this story was told. It really, really bummed me out. And it's just also not something that comes across very often. I mean, this movie was released in, 1988? And, you know, I'm sure that if you look for the content, it's out there, but, like, there's something so specific about this movie, and the fact that the way it's kind of revered and looked at as a classic, and it has so much respect. And it doesn't feel like things like this are getting made a ton, maybe at least not right now. Someone can maybe prove me wrong. But yeah, I agree with everything you're saying. I figured we might be on the same page with this one. I think the big thing, like, if I have one major highlight, and we can get into specific highlights maybe shortly, but I think the big thing for me is that the whole movie, and you touched on this a little bit, throughout its runtime, it has a very complete arc, right? And it's a journey, and like you said, it's not about one specific incident, right? I thought maybe like in this movie they might get to the atomic bomb dropping, or they might get to when the American invasion begins, but it's not really about either of those things. It's just about the constant, like you said, dread, living in absolute fear, and it doesn't really feel like there's a beginning or an end to that. The kids are just sort of dropped into it, right? So parents are gone, and now they just have to figure it out, and we don't really know when this is going to start, right? There's no like third party character or secondary character that's like, in a lot of other movies they might use a crutch, or they might use like maybe I thought they were going to use the aunt to like keep the audience informed on the state of the war. Like, is it nearing an end? Is it not? But then we leave the aunt, and the kids have no source of information, so you just don't know what's happening. And
well, there's
you know what I mean?
At the end, there's the scene at the end of the movie where I think he goes to draw out more money. I think that's the thing too. Like I think he's at the bank, and like they're talking about the war.
That's
and
when he finds out.
And they're like, "Oh, the war is over," and like they're kind of like mocking the kid. Yeah. And that's like that's the other sad thing. Like there's the whole movie is the results of people being affected, like civilians, like people living in the world being affected by this war.
Innocent bystanders,
and it has that tone through the whole movie and everything that follows that original flashpoint of like the firebombing. And then right at the last minute they just show like the wage disparity of all the rich people coming back, people that are able to get out and get away, and they're and like just mocking the people that have been living in it. It was just it was, oh my god, my heart broke so many times during this movie. Like it's also like really, like I think Saida's a good character, like the brother, but the Setsuko, like the young daughter, I think is truly, and this is actually one of a pet peeve of mine in anime in general, is I guess you see it in maybe not in Western animation as well too, but the child character that is just like wise above their years, like like a 4-year-old with like talking and like has the mental capacity of like a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old, and it's just like, again, it's a minor gripe, but in this, like Setsuko like is like a toddler, like she is a young child, she doesn't understand, she doesn't just automatically get something, like she has moments where like she's growing and some things are like within her wheelhouse of understanding, but there's just all this stuff that's not, and they don't just she doesn't just know it. And it's scenes like that where the mom dying, like I think that's like the most one where she can understand a little bit, but like the food shortages and also them too, like trying to like fix everything with salt water. It's just like they're just like doing remedies.
It's desperation, right? Like I agree with you as well. Further to your point, I think about just like the trope, and sometimes like in anime, the slightly overdone, knowledgeable character that's a little bit too young to be that knowledgeable. They did not. They played these two characters perfectly. Setsuko says like the perfect amount of things that are both childish and sometimes a little bit too poignant, and they hit you a certain way, but kids do say shit like that sometimes. But they don't turn her into like this prophetic child. They also show a ton of her just being a kid, and that there's good and there's bad to that, right? Like just being kind of a downright burden at points.
They show the meltdowns,
the meltdowns, exactly. And I think Seita is an incredibly well done character. The execution on him is really, really good, because same deal with him. He's incredibly grounded, and you just see this teenager just trying so hard to keep his shit together.
You see him morphing into something else. Like
he changes.
There's one scene, not to cut you off, but there's a scene where I think they've left their aunt's house, and I think there's raid sirens, and everyone's like kind of evacuating the town because they think that town is now about to get bombed, and you see him like almost on like hands and feet crawling through the streets, running to get and like just pillage the house, like when no one is there. And all I could think of was like Smeagol to Gollum.
Yeah.
And like he was just the way he was kind of like in the house, like lurking, and I was like, oh fuck, like that's but like he's trying to, it's like you said, he's trying to adapt to his surroundings and the situation. Like he's doing everything he can to like to his mental capacity, and it shows that like he still is a kid.
Yes, because
he doesn't know everything.
Exactly, he doesn't have all the answers, right? Like he's mature enough, and he understands that he has to feed himself and his sister, and he's a little bit more physically capable than she is, obviously. And she's clearly his priority, right? Mm-hmm. He focuses on getting money out of mom's bank account once they realize that they can do that, and then just keeping them both fed, giving them both shelter. And there's only 2 moments, I think, in the whole film where he shows a little bit of weakness, and when he finally breaks down and cries a little bit. But, you just figure, like, imagine what he's living through. You can just see the guy trying to keep it together. Right, because he's just clearly living moment to moment, and there's only, I think it's 1 or 2 times, like after she gets really sick, and once he has a moment alone after he realizes his mother has died, and he's finally doesn't have to worry about his sister. That's when he breaks down. But it's like a very like young man, like I just got to keep this stuff together. You know what I mean? I just got to keep the ship moving kind of mentality, and then when he has a moment to feel, he actually feels, but it's because he's at the very brink, because he's been holding it all in for so long.
It's a really subtle thing they do. It's not something that's openly spoken, but earlier in the movie they hit home the notes of like, oh, you're a military family, oh, you're and the aunt too. Like the aunt is a really interesting character, and
yes.
she's I can imagine some people just kind of like calling her what was Walter White's wife's name? In Breaking Bad.
Yeah, no, I know.
You know the character I'm talking
of course. Walter White's wife.
Walter White.
Walter White.
And like she was just like everyone just treated her as like this despicable character of like, oh my god, you're such a bitch. Like look what you're doing to him.
Exactly.
But, like, a lot of the time she was kind of like right,
Oh, dude,
and, like, she was an imperfect character. It's so funny. I would laugh every time the internet would just like blow her up, and it's like, well, like her husband's a sociopath, so like she's not perfect.
She might be feeling a slight bit of stress.
Yeah. So it's funny. I was thinking of when I was watching the character, I was kind of like, the aunt character was, kind of like rubbing me the wrong way, and I just kept thinking back to Skylar White.
Skylar.
I kept thinking back to Skylar, and I was like, well, like the aunt is like kind of not nice in moments. It's kind of old. I remember Leanna was like, that's like an old school aunt, like back in the day, like everyone was so hard as fuck back then, especially during war, you had to be. But she had moments of like, common sense of like, you guys need to, you're not freeloading all this and that. And she was right in moments, but
she was looking out for number one and for her own family, right? It's fun. Like I'm not trying to vindicate her of putting 2 children out on the street in the middle of a war, but I believe, and I wish I knew exactly what, but there was a follow-up project that was planned, and I don't know if it actually happened to this movie, and I don't know if it was a play or like a technical sequel to the movie that didn't get a wide release. But I believe the writer-director wanted to do a follow-up from the aunt's point of view, just to show you what that desperation can do to a person and how it can turn them kind of cold and heartless, even towards family. Because, I think, like we just said, they wanted to paint a clearer picture of like what happened to her and what happened to the way she treated her own family because of her own desperation. But they didn't want to do too much of that in this movie because they very specifically wanted it to be about Seta and Setsuko. Yeah.
It is 100% their story.
Yes. And if they had given the aunt a little bit more time to be a little bit more relatable, it may have detracted from these things that just kept happening to the kids.
100%. Yeah.
So I think they played it right. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, again, before I lose the thought, what I was getting at is they do hit home like the Navy family, like you guys are rich. She kind of held that against them, stuff like that. But can you imagine your father going to war and you're the son in the family? Again, they don't openly say this, but I'm sure he had from the get-go, before all of these firebombings started, that he had to be the man of the house.
Absolutely.
That's like a big thing. How many movies or shows have you watched where it's like a military drama or kind of, tangent near it? And that's always a big thing. It's like, you're the man of the house, son, stuff like that. And it was nice. They didn't openly say that,
But you could tell.
But you can tell, and it was a trend, and it's like you said, like Saida is such like the two of them they're perfect snapshots of regular people in the world, you know, and
yes,
you
they're
don't
so
always
grounded.
get that. So grounded, and like grounded people in a grounded story in a like an actual event, you know, like this is
Which
you
is
know,
the hardest thing to do in any medium, right? Is to make the characters feel relatable and in extraordinary circumstances. So okay, I think we're on the same page there. I'm just looking to see if I have any other huge highlights. Oh, I want to say one obvious thing because we haven't said it yet. I liked the just the animation style.
Sure.
Very 90s. I love that. I don't know like if there's any specific terminology, if that style is known as anything very specifically.
Everything's very round, you know, kind of like at least the character animations are very round and kind of like obviously like I know Studio Ghibli is the production company, but I don't know how much like it clearly felt like a Ghibli movie with some of the stuff taken out, you know, like a lot of I think maybe it's like director to director have their own flourishes they add to their movies. But just the way they draw like the houses, you know, like the homes and like the you know, there's a scene, this is going to sound like really, you know, morose, but the scene of like when he's like running through the hospital trying to find his mom, also one of the best jump scares I've seen in a non-horror movie. When it just like
what was it?
In the beginning when he's trying to find his mom, like he gets told and he's like and he's running from room to room in the hospital trying to find her, and just like just how well and descriptive they made this hospital and or like this makeshift hospital, this and that, and then obviously it cuts right to her, and it was like in a weird fucked up way they threw Sakuga at us, like when they cut to his mom wrapped up in bandages, and I was like, you sick fucks, you know, like it was one of the most hands down one of the most jarring moments of the movie. But
yeah, that, and when they cut to her again, showing her body being thrown into a pit. That was
they do that so casually too, which I think
with no like musical cue or anything, eh? Like
No.
it's just like here you go. It just floats by, and you're just
cicadas.
like, yeah, and you just like get like a shiver. It's very, very disturbing. I will say, just as we wrap up like the whole Sato thing, there are a couple of like Big Brother moments that really stuck out to me. I think like as they are kicked out of their aunt's house and they find their cave, they're like getting supplies and things are looking pretty bad, right?
Yeah.
But again, to distract his sister, he like puts her on his shoulders and they sing on their way home in the rain. And then as they're running out of food, they make tea with the fruit drops. Those two moments, I was just like, I don't know. I thought that they were like very specifically very cool. And then obviously, I don't know if you have this. I'm taking a lot of the cool moments here, but the last one for me is when he brings the Fireflies into the cave to cheer her up and show her all of the beautiful lights. Like just from an animation standpoint, a story standpoint, that's one of my favorite moments of the movie. And it's also followed up with like one of the best lines of the movie and like the funeral for the Fireflies, right? The whole everything where the Setsuko says, I wish, you know, they're so beautiful, why do they have to die so quickly? And then they have to bury them, and it was just like, Jesus, like they can't even have that. I don't know. I thought all of those like Big Brother moments were like very standoutish just because he's just trying to just distract her, right? Like just keep her happy in this literal apocalypse that they're living through. I don't know. I love that.
I think one of the big standout scenes for me is the beach scene, and they reference back to it later. You know, I'll take you to the beach again.
Yeah,
just the same thing. Of, you know, like it's a really potent scene because it really shows that there is moments of serenity where you can kind of block everything out, but then immediately they just like throw in boom, dead body on the beach, and it kind of sets up like, you know, someone just like went there to die, and it kind of alludes to how, you know, it's kind of like, because the movie opens up with him obviously like, you know, on his last breath more or less, with super fucked up. There's just a bunch of other kids. I don't know if it's the beginning of the movie where they reveal there's more kids, or if it's at the end. It kind of zooms out and there's just like 10 other kids also dying around him, which is it was so dirty.
Yeah.
Just you know, sad that that's the way that, you know, some people have to go. But But just like that beach scene, it just shows like, at any moment it can just be over. And even then, they hear more sirens on the beach. Like it's just like they're being haunted this whole way.
Yes.
Like they finally get that moment to breathe and just like, no, your breath is over. Like you're back into it.
Haunted is a good way to put it. It doesn't go away. Like they just can't get away. Mm-hmm. Like even I think maybe 2/3 through the movie, like the audience is getting a little bit used to the nightly air raids or the fire bombings, and then like in broad daylight, a plane starts shooting at civilians. Like toward as the sister is getting sick, like that happens, and it's like, what? Like, is there no relief? Like even daytime isn't safe now. Mm-hmm. That shit was terrifying. I think as much as it bums me out, we should talk about how well they nailed Setsuko's illness. Like that, just like everything else in the movie, just like Seita losing his resolve, I think was extremely well handled because it was a journey. It took time. It was not sudden. She had a rash from like day one, and it just got worse and worse. As you mentioned earlier, the rations got worse and worse. They were starting to run out of money. He became more desperate and would steal, as you noted, like kind of Gollum-like. During the raids, he would run into the fire, literally, to steal clothes so that he could exchange them for rice. And yeah, just everything became very, very desperate, like the closer and closer that they got to their death.
Also, there's the scene where he steals like, because he associates, it just shows like the childlike mind that he actually had, because he goes out, his aunt convinces him to sell his mother's kimono, and he goes out and he associates another kimono with money.
Exactly. Yeah.
And he goes and he tries to sell off in the street, and the woman's like, these are rags. Like, fucking beat it, because
he can't. He's a kid, right? He doesn't know the difference.
Yeah, but
yeah.
But so the thing with the sister, too, it just goes to show that there was one thing. I'm not sure if I just missed it, because there was some weird timeline stuff towards the end of the movie. I wasn't sure if at one point they hit us with some unreliable narrator stuff on Saita's behalf.
What makes you say that?
Well, because I'm not sure like how long he had actually, because there's one point where like we need to get her to a doctor, and then he says that out loud, but then doesn't take her to the doctor, and like it feels like it's hard to tell. Like,
but he does. Like they do see it.
He does, but then when he eventually goes to the daughter, he's just like, oh, it's been like this for like a couple days.
Oh.
And it's like, is it just him being embarrassed, or he just want to be in trouble?
Oh yeah,
you know
like
what
that
I mean?
child,
So,
oh, this just started kind of thing.
And it was like like he just exactly, like So that was the thing. I wasn't too sure. I was like, oh, like, because that would be another, again, a very believable moment. Like, he is a kid. Yeah. Like, how long was this really going on? Because there's she makes a point of,
she mentions it.
I've had diarrhea for a few days.
She goes, something's wrong with my tummy. The diarrhea doesn't go away. That was the quote, and I was like, oh god, even she knows. And it's just like,
it was like he was
upsetting.
So that's what I'm wondering, like, how long had he actually let this go? Like, he felt like he was helping her. Like, maybe he didn't want help. It's hard.
He may not have realized,
It could be. That's the thing too. It's just I think that's why this movie. It really makes you think, like, at all the angles of, like, what he maybe mentally he just couldn't know better. There's just so much, like, the stress alone, whether he openly knew he was stressed, because you don't really have a word for that maybe at that age.
Yeah,
it's such a fascinating view and like take on like a child's mind, and the situation. Like, even as an adult, I cannot imagine what would be racing through my mind. Like, it's really scary stuff to think that actual children, then and potentially now go through situations like this. It's really sad.
It's terrifying. Yeah.
Yeah.
Even her death. A couple things on her death. I think, like, they intentionally wanted you to feel it. Obviously, that's the name of, like, it's like the game of the whole fucking movie. Clearly, is they want you to feel it. But even then, I was still surprised that they showed it. Like, they show the very, like, surreal but realistic moment of him having to get charcoal rations to burn her, to cremate his sister, and then they show you him actually doing it.
Yeah.
That shit hurt. I was just like, God, really? You're gonna show us the whole thing?
It was weird because like the guy that gave him the special surplus, which is fucked up to say that like, oh, when your people have died, here's like our government money for your loved one, which in a way is like, it's good, but it's fucked that has
The guy
to
was
be a
like
thing.
smiley.
But that was the thing. He was like smiley. He's like, yeah, you want a good burn, you do this and da da da. And I'm like, he's happy
business
like
at this point, yeah.
and it's like, fuck, man, like. I don't know.
I read that as like, does this guy realize it's to burn to cremate his sister? And I was like, maybe he does, and it's just so like regular. Like he's just so, you know what I mean? He's been so desensitized by it because he's probably given out so many of these rations. I don't know. I was he's either being obtuse, or the guy is so detached that, you know what I mean? It's one of the two. I don't know. Movie ends on. Her ghost kind of running around, and it actually has one of the best effects that they use throughout the movie that neither of us have brought up yet, which is anytime they're running by water, the reflections in the water, really cool animation.
Oh,
almost like a mirror image the whole way through. Maybe not like the most quote like realistic, but like I just like that it was like a mirror image perfectly every time.
The little elements, like their
little
story.
touches,
it's almost like them narrating their story in a weird way, without using words. So
yeah, and then there's fireflies at the end, of course. Like her ghost is sort of illuminated by them. The soundtrack at the end, the strings in those last 5 minutes. I was like, okay, you've mission accomplished. You broke my fucking heart. All right, just stop, twisting the knife. Okay, do you want a little bit of trivia? I've got one or two.
Yeah.
And then maybe we can move on to like final thoughts and potentially nitpicks. Trivia: the film is based on a true story. I hate to say it. Akiyuki Nasaka lost his sister during the war to malnutrition and blamed himself for her death. He wrote Hotaru no Haka, which translates to A Grave of Fireflies, in 1967 to come to terms with her loss. So, true story, very much amidst the firebombing campaign in World War II. Second one is, if you brighten the poster on the film, for the film, some of the lights shown in the film are not actually fireflies, but incendiary bombs from a B-25 bomber.
Oh, fuck.
And then lastly, just a fun, maybe something a little bit lighter. Production.
That last one. Yeah. That's so brutal.
Sorry. Production of Grave of the Fireflies began on February 1st, 1987, and finished on April 11th, 1988, just 5 days before its world premiere.
Fucking anime forever doing its anime thing.
Yes, that apparently is not a new thing. Okay, that's it. That's all I've got for fun facts. Good Lord.
Yeah.
You were right. This was somber.
Yeah.
My God, tune into the post show for some laughs coming out in 2 days.
Yeah, a little bit of levity.
Good Lord.
Grief powered levity.
Do you have any nitpicks?
It's hard to nitpick.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard, and not like out of a respect thing too, but it's such, whether some elements of the story, like if this was like a straight up adaptation of a biopic or something like that, or like a book, regardless if some stuff was true or not, the things that happen in this movie, regardless if it happened to a single person, it's almost certain it happened to someone else. And I think this is not one person's story. I think this is a society's story of suffering. I think this is a movie for the people at the time. I bet this is very cathartic for a lot of people at the time. Like to this day, there's anime stories and movies and manga. Like it's all, they're Eastern storytelling is very good at like channeling their grief, and making it something else. And I think this movie is just one of the best personifications of that. And I just don't feel like there's any need to nitpick stuff that like, this is some of the saddest shit that has ever happened in human existence. And I think it's beautiful. I think it did a really good job of telling a nation's story, a people's story. And I think it's a fucking awesome movie, man. Like, it's depressing, but it's a movie I want to share with, Corinne when she's much older, like it's I think this is when anime fucking knocks it out of the park and really wants to get a message out there. This is like in the upper echelon of that, like without a doubt in my mind.
Very, very well said, my friend. We are connected telepathically today. I have zero nitpicks. It's just almost a little bit too precious. I mean, even, and I'm not saying that, like, even though we don't really take ourselves too seriously as viewers or critics or reviewers or whatever you want to call it. But the truth be told, I agree with everything you said, but also, if you're listening to this, we are pretty picky sometimes. And I think that there is Grant's angle, which is to say, like, this is such a beautiful kind of retelling of, like, really scary, intense things that have happened. If there were, like, plot machinations and characters that, like, didn't really work, I would probably mention it. But that's just, I think the fact that the story made us feel the way it did, and the fact that we just gushed over it for 35 straight minutes without really, anything going wrong, is because it did it so accurately. It did such a good job that I just don't have anything to nitpick over. This is easily a 9 out of 10. Really, oh, man, beautiful and just heart-wrenching. This one got me in the feels. I'm actually, I think, pretty glad that we ended on this note. Not because it's like, all jokes aside, not because it's family friendly or anything, but just because it's like, this is what anime is often about. We're into anime for a ton of reasons, and, like, lighthearted comedy and levity-filled stuff is one of them. Sure. But also just, like, telling really beautiful stories. And this was a really, really, really good one.
Yeah. It would have been hard. It would have been very hard to follow this up with the other three. Like,
yeah,
they all in their own way. Like, it's funny because they all brought their own thing to the table. You had, like, Your Name had, like, the modern, it was a more modern movie. It was a love story. Paprika had just kind of trippy, like, really out there thoughts and, like, thought experiments. Akira is just, like, an icon, and this is, like, a grounded story. I think we really covered, like, a good rotation of movies for these nights that we've done. And I actually look forward to, like, what the next time we do this is, like, whatever slow part of the season we have next year. I'd like to take some time, and also anyone listening, let us know if there are some other iconic movies that we're just not thinking of for next time. Please tell us, because I had a blast with all of these.
I totally agree. I think it would be really difficult if we started off with Grave of the Fireflies and then we went into, like, Akira or Your Name or Paprika, for that matter. Like, it just doesn't. This is a good note to end on. This has been really, really fun doing these 4 movies. So if you haven't checked out the other reviews, please do so. And like Grant said, if there are other movies you think are, must watches for any reason, right? Like, the 4 movies we reviewed don't have a ton in common other than the fact that they're highly revered. So we're down to watch good stuff. This has been a blast. And obviously, well, maybe not obviously, if this is your first time tuning in, we did this, as Grant mentioned, because we had a bit of a lapse in the schedule and stuff that we wanted to cover. But starting in a couple of weeks, we're going to start reviewing some more exciting shows week to week. Demon Slayer is probably up there. Attack on Titan is part 2 is coming out in January. Season
January
4 part
9th.
2. Yeah.
Schedule it in.
So lots coming in terms of week-to-week content. And, of course, check out the post-show. We're going to rev that up shortly. When I say that, I mean we're going to record it, like, right after this, and then it drops usually a couple days after this does. And that is a much more chill environment. That is not nearly as somber. We're talking, Squid Games, 86, Succession.
Yeah, we are.
Lots of really fun stuff. So definitely tune into that. I think we could probably wrap it up here. Is that right, Grant? Did we forget anything?
No, I think we covered it.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you guys so much for listening. Support the podcast however you like. Like, follow, comment, subscribe. Take the appropriate social media action on the appropriate social media platform. Thank you very much.
Bye, guys.
Cheers.